Right, ladies and gentlemen, what a rare privilege we have before us now as well. We are going to have a debate with your questions. We're going to go about 30, possibly 40 minutes, depending on how we go and depending on how the conversation goes. And the conversation here with this amazing panel is treating the climate crisis like a crisis. This is going to be a conversation on rapidly accelerating the energy transition as well. The topics covered will include the fact that the climate crisis remains at the heart of global attention, and it must not slip down the ranking in terms of top priorities. And I can tell you already, ladies and gentlemen, that that is going to come up straight away, because in the rarefied halls of the World Economic Forum, there is a danger, there is a concern that the climate crisis is slipping down the agenda. We're going to talk about 1.5 degrees. Is it dead? The pathway is narrow but still achievable. I think everybody on this panel still believes that as well. Clean energy transition is at a turning point. It is happening, but it's not fast enough, according to many, many people. Again, I think what you're going to find today is there's a lot of accord between what the IEA is saying, which, let me remind you, represents the OECD nations, represents the consuming nations on energy products, and a lot more than that as well. And there is an urgent need to scale up actions and investments. Advanced economies, especially, need to do more. I already know what this panel thinks about the COP process. So should you, if you've been paying attention. I'll tell you who's here. What an amazing meeting of minds. Dr. Fatih Birol is someone I've known for many years, and I've had the privilege of a lot of private conversations with, and a lot of public conversations with as well. He, of course, is Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. Vanessa Nakate is a Ugandan climate justice activist, UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. It's lovely to see you today. Louisa Neubauer is a climate activist. Hello, Louisa. And founder of Fridays for Future Germany. We also have Helena Gualinga, who is an Ecuadorian environmentalist and human rights activist. It's lovely to see you. And Greta Thunberg, who is a Swedish climate justice activist. One or two of you may well know the ladies here as well. So, there are a lot of questions. You've got a lot of questions as well. But I'm just going to start off with a very open question to the people here today. And I'm going to start off, and I'll just go from my immediate right, and I'll work all the way down to Dr. Birol at the end. Greta Thunberg, I'm just going to ask you what your message is for the World Economic Forum here today. Very nice to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for So we are right now in Davos, where basically the people who are mostly fueling the destruction of the planet, the people who are at the very core of the climate crisis, the people who are investing in fossil fuels, etc., etc. And yet somehow these are the people that we seem to rely on solving our problems, where they have proven time and time again that they are not prioritizing that. They are prioritizing self-greed, corporate greed, and short-term economic profits above people and above planet. And we seem to be listening to them rather than the people who are actually affected by the climate crisis, the people who are living on the front lines, and that kind of tells us the situation, how absurd this is. But the people who we really should be listening to are not here. Instead, we are bombarded with messages from people who are basically the people who are causing this crisis.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Well, for me, coming here, I don't know exactly what my message would be, because what haven't we said and what haven't we done? What haven't we, communicated enough? The climate crisis is evident in the areas that are most impacted. Most cases, these areas are least responsible for the crisis, where people are stretching their livelihoods, people are trying to survive, clinging to their lives and just trying to make it for another day, to make it for another week, to make it for another hour, another minute. So for me, my message is the climate crisis goes beyond statistics and data points. It's about the people, and very so often in this place there is a disconnection between what is being discussed and what is happening on the ground. There is a mismatch between how people understand, the urgency of the crisis here and what is happening in places like Turkana, one of the regions that is being impacted by the drought in the Horn of Africa, which I was able to visit last year. And I met different mothers, different children that are suffering from severe acute malnutrition. And it is devastating to continue to see what the climate crisis is doing to communities and doing to children and different mothers across the world. And one specific child that stood out for me is a child that I met with his grandmother in a hospital where cases of severe acute malnutrition are referred for treatment. And I remember meeting the grandmother and her explaining how, it took them long to find the treatment, and by the time they brought, the child to the hospital, he was in a wasted situation as described by the doctors and the nurses, and she was just praying that the child would survive. And a few hours later, we learned that this child had passed away, and this could have been a preventable death and a preventable crisis. So I feel frustrated I don't know what else to say, because the urgency of the crisis is evident and people are dying, and it's like our leaders are playing games and they don't see the challenge that's happening. I am frustrated and I'm so hurt by what is happening and the inaction. Why is it so hard for people to understand the urgency of what is happening? We could save very many lives because so many people are stretching to try and survive the next minute, the next hour, the next week, the next day. And here the discussions are on growth, development. Why don't we slow down a bit and talk about lives and people? It's just frustrating.
Vanessa, thank you very much for that. Helena.
I come from an indigenous community in the Amazon rainforest, and for decades we've seen how our forest has been cut down, again in the name of development, for oil exploration, for extractivism. The same industry that has caused the climate crisis is also destroying our territories. And while they're at it, they're also committing human rights violations. We don't see the sense of urgency reflected in action. Indigenous communities, indigenous peoples, youth, scientists, we've all been pointing towards a direction where the oil industry they're not going there. They're not going there, the world leaders are not going there. And something that Vanessa said, like, we're frustrated, but what else can we do? We've said everything, we've done everything we can, and still we're going into this really dangerous direction. We're taking a really dangerous path, and we're already seeing how people are suffering on the ground. We see that every day in our lives, and it's completely insane that we are allowing this, and we have people here in Davos that are enabling that through government, through investing in fossil fuel, and at some point there needs to be a stop. This is criminal. This is criminal behavior, and it should be judged as so as well.
Yes, I'm a climate justice activist from Germany, and I spent the last week with Greta and many others defending livelihoods against coal diggers in the Rhineland in Germany, which is the largest single source of CO2 of the whole of Europe. And many people then said, oh, it's an interesting change of scenery coming from the mud in Lützerath to Davos, whereas we walked through the dirty mud in Lützerath, and now we're in Davos witnessing dirty deals being made, so I'm not sure how much of a change that actually is. Chancellor Scholz yesterday said that the future belongs to renewables, and I think there's one part of the sentence that he left out, which is the future does not belong to the fossil fuels. And if we look at the business plans, however, of the big fossil fuel industries worldwide, 96% of oil and gas industry plan to expand, even though we know that the science is very clear, the numbers are very clear, there cannot be any fossil fuel expansion happening everywhere. Yet the business plans and the investments plans, they tell a different story. And what does it mean? What kind of message is coming from that? And the message is, I think, quite clear. The future will not belong to the fossil fuel industries, but they won't lead into that future themselves. As long as fossil fuels get to make the rules of the end of the fossil fuel era, there will not be an end of the fossil fuel era. Someone will have to draw the line. Someone will have to say enough is enough and end the destruction. And that end, and I think we can be certain here, will not come from the industries themselves. And it will not come from slow plans to transition to somewhere. Right now we see that across the world an expansion and an intention is being planned when it comes to fossil fuels. So as long as fossil fuel industries are planning to expand, someone else will have to say no to that. That's why we're turning to the EIA, that's why we're turning to governments worldwide, that's why we're going to the streets. And we also know that as long as investors like BlackRock, like Deutsche Bank, like Qatar, who are the lead investors of RWE, who we fought against last week, as long as they plan to invest in new fossil fuels, they are on the wrong side here. And maybe they don't want to know that, but we can be very certain about that, and we're not going to shy away from spreading that message.
Thank you, Lisa. Look, one thing that's very clear is that seeing four very powerful activists here on the outside of WEC is very interesting, but in terms of bringing the dialogue with powerful institutions such as the IEA, I think it is absolutely fabulous that A, the four of you are here, but B, that Fatty, you have come as well, because not only are you here, and I think it's great you are, but you've also got a view to what's going on in there. Now, the ladies have already said that there is inaction going on inside the halls of the Congress. They have already said that there is no sense of action despite the words, despite, we've just had COP27, I was at COP26, and we're at COP21, 15. How different is what you're hearing here to the sense of urgency in there, Fatty?
Thanks, Steve. First of all, many thanks for the invitation. I think me being here is already a very important signal that I wanted to give the world. But may I first things first, may I first thank to Greta. Vanessa, dear Vanessa, thank you very much. Helena and Luisa, thank you very much what you have been doing. Steve, my message is the following. Energy is responsible for about 80% of the emissions causing climate change. Okay? If we are not able to transform the energy sector, we have no chance whatsoever to reach our climate targets. So we have to transform the energy sector, making it clean, making it secure. And when I look at today the international agenda, the global agenda, including here in Davos, why we have to see that the climate change needs to get more attention, unfortunately, the attention to climate change is sliding down. I find it rather worrying, and it is the reason I thought it is now time to ring the alarm bells, bring the climate crisis together with other crises, the energy crisis, food crisis, at the top of the international policy agenda. And I think this is my main message. climate agenda needs to get, it is a priority in the agenda of the decision.
Let me just get something straight, Patsy, because the activists believe there can be no new fossil fuels projects in order to hit 1.5 degrees. You believe there should be no more fossil fuel exploration, production, new facilities to reach 1.5 degrees. Why is it that the most preeminent organisation, perhaps globally, certainly amongst consuming nations, is saying that, and yet new production is going ahead?
So, Steve, the issue is we have to keep the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. If it goes above that, the rather fragile equilibrium of our planet will be distorted. We will be all in trouble. In order to do that, we need to get energy from clean, carbon-free energy sources. Okay? And to do that, the magic word is investment. Today, investment in clean energy. Today, the world invests about $1.5 trillion. In order to be in line with our climate targets, it needs to go to $4 trillion clean energy investments. And most of them need to come from the developing countries, hopefully with the help of the rich advanced countries. Now, if we do that, if we bring our energy from clean energy sources, then we don't need any more coal, we don't need any more oil and gas, new investments there. But the point of departure is making clean energy investments and having a clean, secure energy future for all. And there is enough money worldwide, there is enough capital. What we have to do is capital and clean energy projects, especially in developing countries, need to meet. And what is missing, in my view, is the international political will. If it was there, this would have happened because we have enough sun, we have enough wind, and electric cars are growing. There is a lot of technological innovation, and we have a lot of potential to see the clean energy to dominate. But unfortunately, what we are seeing today is there is a transition happening, not at the pace that we would like to see, especially once again in the emerging and developing world.
Thank you, Patsy. Greta, you have spoken inside the realms of the COP process. You have spoken outside of the UNFCCC process. You have been inside where talking, and now you're outside. I've done a lot of work just looking at the way you've changed, and you just seem to be on the outside now rather than talking to people on the inside. And I think that's a great shame, because I've been speaking to some amazing people in there the last week, including the Pakistan Minister for Climate Change, who was incredibly powerful, about 1,000-kilometre lakes that just appeared, about farmers having to deal with 50-degree plus heat as well. Do you not feel that your very strong voice actually would continue to do good work if you were actually talking to those powerful people and to those people and just giving them some leadership?
Well, first of all, there are already activists doing that, and I think that if there should be activists inside speaking to these people, it should be those on the front lines and not privileged people like me who are not experiencing the first-hand consequences of the climate crisis. But then again, I think that right now the changes that we need are not very likely to come from the inside. Rather, I believe they will come from the bottom up, so to speak. Because without public pressure, without massive public pressure from the outside, at least in my experience, these people are going to go as far as they possibly can. As long as they can get away with it, they will continue to invest in fossil fuels. They will continue to throw people under the bus for their own gain. So I believe that the changes we need right now needs to happen on the outside. We need to build and create a critical mass of people who demand change, who demand justice. And of course, we could do that also from the inside, but yeah.
I mean, Helena, Ecuador is suffering its own concerns and deforestation and oil groups and gas groups and what have you. Just tell us again where you see the campaign going forward, because I think many of us feel that we have to be pragmatic in terms of working with and understanding the pressure from the outside as well. How do you see the campaign going forward from here?
I completely agree with Greta that we need to build massive movement of people that are demanding change and are demanding justice. And when we are talking about the energy transition, when we're talking about the green transition, we also need to make sure that that is just. And I think that's really, really important that we have voices from the places that are being affected both by climate change, but also by the place what the energy transition would mean for communities on the ground, vulnerable communities. And I think that perspective really needs to be taken into account by the private sector, and it's a perspective that cannot be left out. Because if we do that, we're leaving out people again, just like we've done during the entire climate crisis. And I would like to, together with Greta, Vanessa, Luisa, and I, we've created a cease and desist letter to oil CEOs, urging the oil CEOs to phase out from new fossil fuel. We know that they knew. There's a report that's come out saying that they knew way before us what they were doing when they were exploring for oil. They knew what the consequences would be of CO2 gas emissions. They knew the irreversible consequences, the huge impact it would have on people's livelihood, the huge impact it would have on the environment. We launched this a couple of days ago, and we're almost reaching 900,000 signatures, which really shows the commitment of youth, which really shows the commitment of civil society and people, and the change that we are demanding. And this is a message to these CEOs and decision makers of how urgently we want and we need change.
And we are very happy to see that this message is in fact in line with what the EIA says very clearly, that there cannot be any fossil fuel expansion happening anywhere. Fossil fuel industries had 40 years time to prove that they're up to anything good. They clearly failed. And so the message is very clear, and this is not just clear to us activists, it is clear to people everywhere, especially those fighting at the front line. So we are very happy for you to be here today, and we would very much invite you to carry on this message with us, Mr. Bureau.
So we already have our open letter on 18th of May 2021, when we made the clean transformation of the global energy sector, net zero 2050. We made our report. So we are very happy to see that there will be a big increase, hopefully, for clean energy investments, not fossil investments, so that we can both have energy, because energy is a good thing. What is better is the emissions. So we'll have both energy, and we are going to reduce the emissions and their impact on the planet. So I am very happy that our activist colleagues here are pushing this agenda forward.
Luisa, let me just come back to you. A little gentle pushback as well, because I understand what's been going on at Gatsby, and I understand why you were there as well. But when you look at the longer message from Herr Scholz, he said the following: we're going to be 100% energy from renewable sources by 2035. Wind and solar to reach 80% by 2030. Germany will be climate neutral by 2045. This is a good progression. This is a good result in many ways. There are other crises going on in the world. The catchphrase here, and I love a catchphrase here at WEF, is polycrisis. Keeping the lights on in Europe, fighting against the Russians in Ukraine as well. This has created new dynamics and other crises. And I understand what all of you are saying, including Patty, about climate initiatives slipping down the agenda, but actually the short-term remedies to actually keeping the lights on in Europe, action had to be made. And I know you're going to push back at me now.
Excellent question. Well, what we see since really the climate movement started and really emerging at a different scale across the globe, there has been a response by leaders, and that was a friendly message to the PR departments for more green headlines. And so we are well aware that leaders across the world, and also Mr. Scholz, they know their vocabulary, and they know, where something net zero has to happen and something green has to, be put out. But we don't say listen to the science for a joke. We say, and I think that is clear to people across the world, what effectively counts is the numbers. It's a science. And when we look at what is behind all those big promises, in many cases, and that is the case in Germany, what we see is a public breakup with the Paris Agreement that is being performed. And when I look at countries like Germany, we are on the top 5 of global, of the top polluters worldwide. There are few countries that are as responsible as Germany and the G7, of course. Who would we turn to if it comes to sticking to pledges made in Paris? Who are those countries are we expect to provide the finance, to provide the industrial transformation, if not those countries, if they don't, start to deliver? And so, luckily enough, the science is clear, the numbers is clear, and we don't have to be fooled anymore. And people are rising up everywhere. Just the other week, there were 30,000 people protesting with us against the extension of the coal mine, with support from across the world. And we're really seeing that the PR strategy that hoped you could just market away the climate crisis is not working out, whereas the people are there and they are willing to tell the truth.
Steve, can I say something here? I think we can have some, when we take the energy world today, we can have some slight optimism, legitimate optimism here. Because last year, 2022, the amount of renewable capacity coming to markets was the record high. We have never seen so much renewables coming around the world. Very good. The efficiency improvements, very strong, and a lot of clean energy technologies are growing. The issue is, there are two issues here. One, they are not growing fast enough, they should be, to be in line with 1.5. The second, for me, the nerve center of the problem, the emerging and developing countries in Africa, in Asia and Latin America. There is I think, a moral responsibility of the advanced economies to support the clean energy transition in the emerging world. This is key, in my view.
I absolutely agree. And I want to ask Vanessa and Greta a question on this, different questions. Vanessa, one of the key parts of the UN FCC process and the COP27 has been that actually financing for developing nations is being seen as absolutely key to the success. We can't just have the rich West finding renewables if there isn't support for the developing nations. Are you seeing any evidence of that on your travels and of course your heartbreaking experiences? Is there any evidence that some of those promises are getting to ground zero?
Well, I can speak from the most recently established Loss and Damage Fund at COP27. It was established, but it's still an empty bucket with no money at all. And coming here at Davos again, you mentioned something about the energy crisis, keeping the lights on for Europe and the West. I understand that this is not the West Economic Forum. This is the World Economic Forum, and many times the discussions about the interests of the Western countries. How can we ensure that we address this, in Europe? How can we ensure that we address this? But then there's been an ongoing energy crisis, for example, in the global south, on the African continent for decades, with over 600 million people with no access to basic electricity. So I think that this really needs to be treated like a world economic forum, because I think the world doesn't only constitute of Europe and the West in general. So I just really wanted to say something on that previous question that you asked, that if there is an energy crisis, it's not just in Europe, it has been there for decades, and we need the massive scale up of renewables, especially in communities that are experiencing energy poverty or that have been experiencing energy poverty for decades. So yes, there is a need for that finance for adaptation. There is a need for real money for loss and damage, because with whatever crisis that we see, it's multiple in the countries, for example, in the global south, and even the discussions of 1.5, as the ultimate space of survival. But at 1.2 degrees, it's already a living hell for so many communities across, the African continent, across the global south. So when we hear, discussions of 1.5 as, the place that will save us all, maybe it's a place that will save the Western countries, but at 1.2 it's already catastrophic for so many communities, and that's why it's really important that we cannot have any new fossil fuel investment. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres announced that the business models of fossil fuel companies are inconsistent with human survival. They're inconsistent with human existence. He already said it's more an economic madness to make any more of these investments. So to ensure that people are protected, not just in the West, but the entire world, we must phase out all the fossil fuels, and that is coal, oil and gas, and massively support a transition to renewable energy, especially in the global south.
Thank you.
Can I say something to support West Africa? Because Africa we don't talk much. Now, in sub-Saharan Africa, every second person doesn't have access to electricity. That's number one. Number two, 2 out of 3 households using primitive cook stoves for cooking, which creates a lot of respiratory diseases, especially for women and children, and it is the top 3 premature death reasons in sub-Saharan Africa. This can be solved, this problem, both of them, access to clean electricity and access to clean cooking, with a very small amount of money, enough money to pay a 1 LNG terminal in one country. You can solve the problem in entire sub-Saharan Africa, just to put in that context.
But
Of course.
I think the only challenge is that we are only discussing about the energy crisis, and like you've said, we don't talk about Africa a lot. I really picked that, and I think it's really problematic because it's like Africa is an afterthought, or so we're busy focusing on privileged countries while leaving out communities that have been suffering for decades. The world doesn't revolve only around the West.
Yeah, and it's not just Africa or the West, or developing versus developed, because the ramifications in terms of migration and social issues will affect the whole world if indeed these aren't addressed. Greta, a very difficult question is, how should the developing world be allowed to develop? Should we actually allow, but should it be okay for developing nations to use coal, to use oil, to use gas, to use fossil fuels, so they can industrialise, so they can keep the lights on, so they can provide feedstocks for agriculture? It's very tricky to know what developing nations should be able to do, rather than, again, the rich West that this concentration of a lot of this topic has been about.
First of all, I think that the term developing countries is a bit misleading. It's not like they are underdeveloped, it's more like they are overexploited by other countries like ours. And I don't think I'm in the position to tell others what to do. The climate crisis boils down to justice and what's already happened. This is a cumulative crisis. What we do, the emissions we emit stay in the atmosphere for a very, very long time and will continue to destabilize the biosphere for many, many generations to come. And of course, not only environmental effects, but also thus people. So who am I to say that I've had these privileges, but now others that haven't been able to do so shouldn't, because we are facing a crisis and so on. Of course, that's what the very roots of this crisis is, this mindset that some people are more worth than others and so on, that we seem to be sacrificing people for this. And this just, the thing that this does is that it only puts the so-called Western world in an even more responsible position. Not responsible, but you get what I mean. we have an even bigger responsibility. Because to compensate and to make sure that equity is at the heart of climate action, we cannot continue to overlook these effects, and it needs to be embedded in every conversation, every discourse, and yet it is still completely absent.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, we have a limited amount of time left. I'm seeing all the hands going up. This gentleman's been very patient. He's put his hand up 4 times as well. If you just tell everybody what your news organisation, who you are, and then direct your question.
Thank you. David Gevis, New York Times. This November, COP28 will be hosted in the United Arab Emirates, one of the world's largest oil producers. And the UAE has selected its head of its state-owned oil company as the head of the proceedings. Greta, what does that say to you about the proceedings, about COP, and how does it affect your expectations about what we can expect?
Greta's just asked if we can make this an open question. Maybe if one of you wants to answer, maybe you could give a conclusion on it as well afterwards. Louisa, Helena, do you want to pick up?
Well, obviously it's ridiculous, and it's not new though. We've seen the last COP in Egypt and how fossil fuel lobbyists flooded that space. So why should that change if nobody who is in the position of power demands those places to be working towards justice and not just towards more lobby deals?
I just think it sends a message also where we're headed right now, for putting the heads of fossil fuel companies to lead climate negotiations. We've had them investing and in COPs for decades now, and we've seen where that has led us, which is nowhere. There's a huge interest of conflict there, and it just sends this message of actually not taking it seriously. And I think it's exactly what they're doing. They're not taking this seriously.
Vanessa, do you want to take on this as well? No? And just find worth your question.
I mean, lobbyists have been influencing these conferences since basically forever, and this just puts a very clear face to it. Exactly as previous panelists have said, it's completely ridiculous.
I think, who's on the next question? The gentleman here?
Okay. My name is Hannes Koch, Tageszeitung Taz, Berlin, Mr. Birol. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz is in favor of exploiting new gas resources off the coast of Senegal, West Africa, and he argues these gas resources would be a bridge for developing countries to get rid of coal power plants. What do you think of that argument?
Now, first of all, as I said, Africa, we have to look at Africa very, very closely. Now, in terms of electricity generation, I believe almost all the new electricity generation in sub-Saharan Africa needs to come from renewables because it is cheap, especially solar. Let me give you one statistics which I find very disturbing. As I said today, in sub-Saharan Africa, 1 out of 2 people have no electricity, number 1. Number 2, sub-Saharan Africa has 40% of the global solar radiation, very rich. And number 3, the solar is the cheapest source of electricity generation in Africa. Yet, today, the amount of solar power capacity in sub-Saharan Africa is, just to give a context, 1/3 of the solar power capacity in Belgium. Think of the map, global map. How big is sub-Saharan Africa, how many people live there, and how big is Belgium. So from that point of view, there is a huge potential for electricity generation in sub-Saharan Africa. Having said that, there are some applications, because the energy you don't need only for electricity generation, you need for other things. Food processing, desalination of water. For these things, you may need fuels which can create high temperature heat. And here you can use gas. And here I would like to say that Africa's share in global emissions is 3% today. Even if, I don't think that it will happen, but even if Africa would develop all these natural gas resources, it will only go to 3.4%. So from that point of view, I would be very careful to put Africa in a different context than other countries. You can't compare Africa with other countries here. Thank you.
Let's get a question from this lady over here.
Hi, Mariah from ITV News. This is for Dr. Birrell. We know that banks, despite their net zero pledges, continue to fund new oil and gas extraction. What's the IEA's view on this? Is it problematic?
So, it is their money, first of all. It is not IEA's money. But I think I see three risks there. And because banks and others are saying they are putting this because of the energy crisis we are in. The first risk is if you today decide, even decide today, to build a new oil field, the first oil will come to the market in 6-7 years of time. It will not come tomorrow. There is a delay here. It will not be immediately ready. This is number one. Number two, I am not sure. 7 years of time, the global oil demand will still increase and we will need more oil in the future because the electric cars are growing very strongly. There will not be demand, so there may be a business risk for those banks. This is the second point. And the third point is, it is a climate risk. From this 3 points of view, the timing doesn't justify this energy crisis doesn't justify this 7 years. This is a business risk, and there is also the climate crisis. In general, if I may, Steve, one shouldn't imagine to justify the Russian invasion of Ukraine some large-scale fossil fuel investments. One shouldn't use it as an excuse.
Right, let's get a question from this gentleman here who's been very patient.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Uwe Häuser. I'm an editor with the German weekly site. And I've been listening to you, the activists, and I got a little scared in the following way. Almost all of you said, we've done everything we can, which sounded like, you know, you're kind of reached an end, which I hope isn't true at all, because we keep needing you. And I guess my question is, which direction do you plan to take? I think there are two major weapons for to avoid, as Vanessa said on her t-shirt, these stupid bridges, as they're called, into nowhere. One is capitalism, sort of feeding the oil and gas industry with its own weapons, meaning with cheaper renewable energy, especially in the south of the world. We're far from that, but I think that's one way to go. The other is litigation. There's a lot of focus in litigation. So my question is, where this Fridays, where do you intend to go to make sure that your influence stays high?
So what I'll do is, just to say, I've got time for one more question after this, so one of you, I'm not looking yet, and what I want to do is, if I may start with all of you answering that question, if you would as well, and I'll start off with you, if you would, Louisa.
And should we take another question to answer two maybe, or not?
Well, you've got two questions there anyway.
Okay.
Are you going down the
Yeah,
litigation route, and
okay.
what other route forward?
Well, I think it's very clear that as an activist, what we do what we do not because it's easy or because it's convenient, but because it's necessary. And we don't do it despite it's hard, but because it's hard and it's a tough run. And what we see though is that we are joined by forces across the globe, and luckily enough, we are more than ever. And we see the most unlikely alliances are building up. Speaking of the protest in the coal area in Germany, we were joined by farmers, by churches, by grandparents, by people from really across the place who start understanding that this is their time to act. And the idea that, you know, the climate activists will save us all, it's another myth to reassure in a time where there can't be reassurance on things. So that I think is a very important message. And speaking as someone who has successfully sued their own government, I think litigation, of course, is something that we will look at again and again and again. This is a letter to cease and desist, and I think looking at the legal context of that, it is, of course, there are more steps that can be taken there, which I think is very important. I would just like to maybe say one more thing about solving crisis, because that came up from you, Steve, but also from the audience. It's a fairy tale to tell that new fossil fuels will solve any kind of crisis. The energy crisis we're in is a fossil fuel energy crisis. It is existing only because of a singular dependency on fossil fuels, in this particular fossil fuels from Russia. And what we're seeing is that new fossil fuels don't solve energy crises in Europe, but they produce crises across the globe. And whenever someone goes ahead and starts selling a new fossil fuel project as a solution to any kind of crisis, I think it's a journalistic duty, but also a public duty, to challenge this and to ask what kind of crisis to be solved and which new crisis is to be produced here, which, as we heard on the panel, is very obvious, I think.
May I add something here?
Not now, but Fuzzy, we'll come back to that
just one line.
very briefly.
I think that the lasting solution to our energy crisis go through clean energy investments. Just one thing.
Thank you, Fuzzy. Helene.
I think the reason why we do this is because we know we have something to defend. You know, I come from the rainforest and living there. When I go back here, I go back to a clean river still. I go back to a rainforest that is standing, that is living, that is healthy. I go back to a people that has been fighting for decades. I have that, and I have something to defend. What I do can assure you is that it will be, excuse my French, a pain in the ass for everyone who's working towards the new exploration of fossil fuels and destroying our planet. And that, I think, I speak for all.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Well, I think that, you know, one of the challenges that I see is that there's so many people saying that they need us. There's so many people saying we are inspiring. There's so many people giving standing ovations, but few of them are joining us in our fight for climate justice. So I think that as we move forward, I mean, our activists are expected to be strong and all that, but it can be frustrating. You know, it can be frustrating to see the inaction and to see the crisis continue to impact so many people. So I think we need to move from a place of being told that we are needed to people joining us and working with us in, you know, whatever space that you're in, if it's in the law, if it's in the schools, if it's in media, whatever thing that you can do, like play a part in our fight for climate justice.
Yeah, I mean, we are nowhere near the end. We have only just begun. But no one said that this was going to be easy. It's we know that the changes that we are advocating for are not going to happen overnight, and that is why we have to stay strong during a longer period of time. But also, we cannot do this on our own. The climate activists currently need to multiply many times. We need many more because we need help. Right now we are still moving in the wrong direction. We are speeding in the wrong direction. The global emissions of greenhouse gases are still increasing. We are heading completely in the wrong direction. We need many more, so we urge everyone to join the fight.
Okay, I have got time for one short question. I'm going to let the lady, one short question, and I guess very brief answers, because I know you've all got to move on as well. So this lady here.
Really quickly, the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S.
And who you are, sorry?
Madison Mills from Bloomberg. The Inflation Reduction Act is getting a lot of attention here at Davos this week, and other nations and global leaders are countering that legislation with their own. What do you make of that legislative tete-a-tete on climate change? Is that effective?
Why don't you start off with what you see, positive or negative, from the IRA, and then we'll just move on and just ask if the activists want to comment on this one as well.
I was, first of all, I should say, Steve, that I am a man who makes his hands dirty with data every single day, as you know, the energy data. And I have definitely a view of a legitimate optimism as far as the clean energy is concerned today. It is growing, but the problem is it is not growing fast enough to reach our climate targets. So it is not something that it is stopping, it is growing now. In addition to all the market forces, government decisions and so on, the Inflation Reduction Act, in my view, is a very transformative move from the United States, giving about $400 billion, President Biden and his government, to clean energy sources. It is solar, it is wind, it is electric cars, it is clean hydrogen and others. So therefore, I hope other countries, and India is moving in the same direction, I hope Europe will come at a response to address the clean energy. They all together help to reach our clean energy goals. So this is my hope, and Inflation Reduction Act is a step in that direction.
So it's the public sector coming up with the carrot as well as stick. Does anyone want to comment on what's happening from the US government and what you hope other governments to do in terms of incentivising companies to look for more green initiatives? I don't think we do there. Yeah, okay, right. Why don't I ask a very final question then, and I would literally want a 10-second answer from all of you as well. I do want to end this and try and say, is there anything that you're seeing at the moment? I can tell you what I see as optimistic, but I'll tell you afterwards as well. Do you see anything at the moment going on that gives you a cause for optimism? We'll just go down the line very quickly. Greta.
The people standing up and raising their voices against all that is happening. That's the hope right now. The hope comes from the people.
Vanessa.
Same.
Elliot.
Same.
And Louisa.
Yeah, I think that there were excellent last words. I think we keep it to that. The power is with the people, and as Greta said, we urge many, many more to join. The term activist itself hopefully doesn't need to exist at some point anymore, because people have understood that standing up for the right to live and for livelihood shouldn't be an act of activism, but the most common thing of all.
And maybe I can add to the people when also people on the ground are not giving up. They're still putting up again hell of a fight.
Fatty, cause for optimism.
Now, Steve, what I see is that this challenge is really very huge. Transforming the entire energy sector, which has been in place decades and decades. And to do that, in addition to technology, government support, and so on, we need one thing, in my view, most important. To bring together a grand coalition of the people who are genuinely interested to tackle climate change, those governments, civil society, companies who are genuinely interested to tackle climate change. And I think this grand coalition is happening slowly but surely, and this gives me optimism.
And that is very similar to my optimism, the fact that we've got one of the most powerful men in energy sitting on a panel with four of the most powerful activists in climate change. So I just want to thank all of you. Dr. Fatty Birol, thank you very much indeed. It's been good to see you again. Luisa Neubauer, thank you very much indeed. Helena Gualinga, really nice to meet you. Vanessa Nakate, incredibly powerful. I mean, thank you very much indeed. And Greta Thunberg as well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. A round of applause, please.
All right, folks, thanks very much for your time, your patience, your respect and your silence. If you could, we're going to do a quick photo with the panel, and we can let them go, as I asked them previously. If you just let them get out of the room and let them go downstairs, and you can catch them on down the way. So we'll do a quick photo now, thank you.
Cameras.
Please just pop your phones down, we'll do an iPhone call in a second.
Why don't take the ladies?
Could you bring the up? Yeah.
And how about with just the panel and without me in it as well, perhaps? Fatty, why don't you stand up?
No one else.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, we've got what we need. Thanks, as I said. Just let them leave if we can. Just clear the path. Thank you.
Non, je crois que moi je vais